Welcome back to Ethics. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about Aristotle's virtue ethics. Um, Aristotle's famous text on this matter, his view on ethics, is what's called his Nicomachean Ethics. Um, Aristotle was a student of Plato and kind of broke with Plato in different ways. And in some ways, both Plato and Aristotle are kind of in the tradition of virtue ethics. But Aristotle has probably perhaps a much pronounced version of this ethical theory. Before I get into Aristotle, let me just mention, moving forward with the course, Aristotle subscribes to and advances a view called virtue ethics. This is one of the three major camps in kind of traditional ethical theories. So there's virtue ethics, which we'll expand on today, and like kind of the central ideas behind that. But there's also deontology, which views ethics in terms of it really means the study of duty or obligation. And it really views ethics in terms of the principles or reasons for our actions rather than what the actions are themselves exactly. So, and then the third camp is consequentialism, and that really views actions as right or wrong based on the consequences they produce, right? So if your action makes more people happy than it does, kind of harm people or put people out, then it's good. And if your actions, provide bad results, then it's bad. So there's virtue ethics, deontology, and consequentialism. And so we're kind of starting that series of looking at each of those three major camps. And then finally, at the end of the course, we'll kind of look at some critiques of kind of all three of those camps by looking at feminist ethics and ethics of care. So to expand on virtue ethics, the central idea behind virtue ethics is that we understand ethics or being ethical in terms of being a good person, a good or virtuous person, right? And that might sound, you know, um, not like not very deep or something like this, but it's a substantial commitment. And as we move forward to these other camps like deontology and consequentialism, they will not view ethics in terms of being a good person. They'll view ethics in terms of the evaluation of particular actions, right? So the thing that you are evaluating, to see the unit of evaluation, is the person as a whole for virtue ethics. For other ethical paradigms, oftentimes it's not the person, but it's the action, right? So in those other ethical paradigms, we want to know whether or not you're doing the right thing in a given situation. But for Aristotle and other virtue ethicists, that's too narrow of a view. They think you need to look at the person as a whole and whether or not they're really a good person. And for Aristotle, this will mean it'll be about developing that moral character and all the things that kind of go together with that, and all the habits you have around being a person, and this kind of stuff. So for Aristotle, virtue ethics is about being a good person. It's about developing good character, and this will be about, for him, finding a kind of balance in your life where you can achieve human excellence. For him, or the term is eudaimonia, and this really is translated as happiness. But as we'll see, this term eudaimonia is important to point out because his notion of happiness is fairly different from the kind of happiness that we tend to use in everyday language. I'll get to that in just a minute. So one major thing, major kind of framework Aristotle focuses on is this idea of teleology. Um, Teleology has to do with the aim or purpose of a thing. And really it's like the study of a telos, and telos is translated as aim or purpose. And so teleology is really about understanding something in terms of its purpose, right? So for Aristotle, we really understand human beings by understanding their ultimate aim, okay? And lots of things have an aim or a purpose, right? So you've got artifacts, things like hammers and tables and cars, right? They all have a purpose, and we kind of understand what that thing is in terms of what it does, what it's supposed to do, right? So you understand the car as transportation, right? It gets you from point A to point B. You understand as a hammer as something that hits nails, but also you can understand animals in terms of their telos or their aim or their purpose, them kind of fulfilling their purpose. Fish swim, or breathe underwater, and they're aquatic, and you understand, predators to hunt, and all these kinds of things. So, but also you can understand activities in terms of their aim, right? If I'm, pouring water and then grabbing coffee grinds and putting them in a filter and all this kind of stuff, all those activities kind of center around the aim of making coffee, right? And if you see someone on a court and there's a hoop with a net and they're throwing a big round orange round ball around, that what they're doing is they're playing basketball, right? And if you're playing basketball, that the goal is to make baskets and to win, right? So you kind of understand all these activities in terms of what they're after, right? What their purpose, what their aim is, okay? And so for Aristotle, this idea of eudaimonia, or happiness, is really what he thinks is the ultimate aim of human activity, right? And um, so he makes this interesting argument at the outset of the reading selection, where he considers he's motivating the study of ethics. And Aristotle actually makes a quite strong argument, or a strong claim. He thinks that ethics is the most important thing for us to study. And why is this? Well, he thinks, look, all our activities have some kind of aim. Like I gave the example of making coffee, or playing basketball, or whatever. But also, I mean, there's a reason why you eat. There's a reason why you go to school. There's a reason why you exercise. There's a reason why you spend time with your family. All these kind of things, and they're all aimed at something. And usually the purpose of that aim ultimately will lead us to some idea. It's either because those things make us happy, or those provide some step towards being happy, right? So, drinking a cold drink on a hot day will make us happy kind of in an immediate sense. But, going to the dentist will maybe not make us happy at that point, but it will make us happy in the long term, right? School, maybe you might feel some kind of immediate pleasure from learning, but you also might think that your ultimate aim is to get a degree, and the ultimate aim of that is to get a good job. And then if you have a good job, then you have good money, and then you can be happy, right? Buy the things that will make you happy, right? Um, and so Aristotle thinks there's got to be some kind of final end to all these activities, and ultimately it's happiness, right? And I give some examples in my notes. Just think about this. Why do we have schools? We have schools because they educate people and they prepare people for the workforce and all this kind of things, and ultimately will kind of facilitate our happiness, right? Why do we have roads? Why do we watch Netflix? All these things, kind of all the various activities we have can kind of all be seen to center around this idea of happiness, genuine happiness, real happiness, right? There are certain things we do that make us happy for a period of time. You get drunk, or you eat a cheeseburger or something like this, but ultimately we want to kind of like align ourselves to a place where we're really kind of like genuinely content with our lives. And so, because this idea of happiness really underlies all these different activities, Ar- Aristotle thinks we really ought to study this idea of happiness, right? And how it functions and underlies all these different activities and how we pursue it, right? Because that's kind of like the key to life in a certain sense. So it really is the most important thing to study for Aristotle. Um, of course, it's interesting because, ethics is usually a very kind of tangential subject. With some people study it, some people don't, and if you do, it's very minimal your study in it. So Aristotle kind of runs against the grain a little bit here on this claim, but I think it's an interesting point. And so, of course, if we're going to study the good, the next kind of step he does is we need, or eudaimonia, happiness. We need to kind of like get clear about what we're talking about. I've already said that eudaimonia is different from our common conception of happiness, and he goes through three different conceptions of happiness. There's pleasure, like bodily pleasure, and that's not going, and he kind of evaluates each to see if they're really the ultimate good. And he finds that each of these three kind of falls under a more general, broader, and more kind of absolute sense of um, of goodness or happiness, right? And so bodily pleasure, of course, is good, but it obviously is not the ultimate good, right? Because you can overdo it. You can be, drinking and smoking and eating too much, right? Or sleeping too much, or whatever it is. And so that kind of needs a further caveat that, even though you're experiencing some kind of happiness, you're not really experiencing the ultimate happiness. There is a certain sense in which those things are somewhat instrumental. Okay. He talks about honor or social happiness, right? That's a good thing, but of course, if you pursue that too much, that can make you very facetious, two-faced. You're always kind of seeking the approval of others. You lack a certain degree of self-determination, so that needs to be kind of placed under a broader heading of happiness. And he also talks about thought, and he kind of cuts that short, but you can see how pursuing mental stimulation all the time itself can also be kind of problematic, right? If you're just kind of stuck in your house, always just, I don't know, doing puzzles or reading all the time and never getting out or talking to anyone, that can kind of make you awkward. You need to kind of balance that. So one way to think about eudaimonia is that it is itself a balance of all these kinds of pleasures, right? Where you find that kind of happy medium that gives you a balanced, well-rounded life, right? Where you're not neglecting any of these things, but you're not kind of overdoing it on all these. And this is what eudaimonia is, right? So eudaimonia is this kind of balance where you have a certain kind of satisfaction with your life. Now, the translation of happiness is problematic because happiness we tend to think about as like a feeling, a sentiment, right? Someone says something to you, they give you a compliment, you feel happy for the moment, right? And then it just kind of goes away. That's really not what they're talking about with eudaimonia. It's much more of a developed sense of kind of well-being. I think it's more akin to the kind of satisfaction you get from, I don't know, being a mother, or being a good son, or being graduating from high school or college, or getting a promotion at a job that you really like, completing an artwork, these kinds of things, right? Like it's a sense of achievement, right? So anyway, so he thinks this idea of eudaimonia must be like the ultimate good that's kind of structuring all these things, and even the other kinds of good that we think about, like bodily pleasure and honor and mental stimulation. So anyway, so this is basically what we have in book one, is this kind of etching out of the idea of ethics. And for him, being ethical is going to be achieving this sense of happiness and this sense of contentment and well-being in your life, which consequently will also be, I think, a kind of happiness or for the people about you, right? Because like the better you are as a person, the better you're going to be towards other people, right? But the focus is really individualistic, kind of at the forefront here. So now in book two, this view, I mean, we're just kind of etching out the basics. In book two, you really get the more definitive parts of Aristotle's view. And there are two main claims that I focus on. First is that being ethical is a practical matter. It's about developing and maintaining and refining a skill. It's a matter of practice, habit, and development, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. The second point is that being ethical is a matter of finding that balance, a mean between extremes. This is oftentimes called Aristotle's mean or the golden mean, these kinds of things. So the first point, that being ethical is a practical matter. Think about how a skill is different than just having knowledge, right? Um, Aristotle makes this kind of claim at some point, and it's really taken a dig at Plato and other theorists who are trying to find the ultimate good or try to understand the good as just like kind of a principle or something like this or a concept. And Aristotle says something to the effect that, trying to find, the right concept of the good and thinking that that's going to help you be ethical is like listening to the advice of a doctor and then not doing anything that the doctor says, right? And thinking it's going to make you healthy. It's just not, right? It's just not the way to understand medicine, and he thinks it's not the way to understand ethics. He thinks, first of all, you can start to be ethical before knowing all the answers about what the right thing to do is, right? He thinks you can just start with whatever you've got, and kind of focus on being good, develop, can, associate yourself with people who are, doing good things and trying to help people and trying not to do things that you think are bad and kind of just like go from there. And this is because he thinks ethics is like the exercise of any other kind of capacity or skill. A good analogy here is, think about playing guitar. How do you get to be a good guitar player? You play guitar, right? You don't need to know all of the details about music theory and chords and scales and all this kind of stuff to start, right? You just need to know a couple of chords, someone who knows a little bit about playing guitar and just kind of start getting a feel for it, right? Because you need to acquire that skill. And you will learn all those things, all the kind of technical things about music and as you learn, but that goes in kind of tandem with you building the skill, right? And also, if you knew everything about guitars, how they're made, all the different chord structures and scales and all that kind of stuff, it's not going to make you a good guitar player either, right? You exercise that skill in order to build it, right? It's kind of like building a muscle. And Aristotle thinks being ethical is like this, right? You have to understand it as a practical matter. It's something that needs to be practiced, and it's something that needs to be developed. You need to acquire certain habits, and we do this all the time. It has to do with moral education and stuff like this. It's very much is kind of descriptive of a lot of our experience, right? You grow up in a certain situation with your parents or caretakers or whatever, and they impart upon you a certain degree of moral education, and you develop certain habits. You say please and thank you. You wait while someone's speaking. You don't throw things in the house. You know what I mean? You don't hit people. These kinds of stuff that you kind of teach a toddler as they grow. Aristotle thinks we're learning all those habits to kind of build ourselves to being a good person. So that's kind of like the first point, and that's a major point. He thinks you can't just know all the answers about ethics. You need to actually be a good person. It's not enough to know what a good person should do. You have to acquire those habits and skills to do those things. And then the second point is the idea of a mean. So he thinks that we're going to pursue all the virtues, and doing that, we are finding a balance between extremes of excess and deficiency of those virtues, right? And so I think for Aristotle, the concept of these virtues is such that it kind of has a mean or a healthy medium kind of baked into it. What do I mean? Okay, so think about courage as one virtue, right? And Aristotle says, if you lack courage entirely, you have a deficiency of courage, then you are a coward. And we definitely don't think that that's a good thing. But also, you can have an excess of courage, right? And an example of this, if you're a warrior and you go out into battle by yourself against 1,000 soldiers, you're not courageous anymore. You're just stupid, right? That's not smart. That's too much courage. You think too much of yourself, and you're just basically on a suicide mission at that point. And so if you have too much courage, all of a sudden, like it kind of, you end up not being courageous anymore. And you can do this with lots of different virtues. Just think about something like honesty or something like this. If you're too honest and you're telling everybody everything that you're thinking about all the time, then that's not good, right? You're ending up telling a lot of people things that they don't want to hear, and you're being fairly inappropriate. And you can be too charitable, right? You're giving away all your money, all of a sudden you're broke. That's not really going to help anyone. And so you can also find this mean in all kinds of other things. Aristotle has a very holistic view of what being a good person is. It's about not having excess and deficiency in all kinds of areas of our life. And he kind of says that being a good person is about doing the right thing for the right reason, with the right people, at the right time, with the right emotions, out of kind of a firm and immutable moral character. So you have this mean when it comes to your emotions, or your kind of dispositions. You don't want to get too angry, but if you never get angry, that's not good. You don't want to be too sad all the time, but there are certain appropriate times in which you should be sad, right? And also, hanging out with the right people. You don't want to associate with people who are really, really bad all the time. That's going to rub off on you and all these kinds of things. And so he has this very holistic idea in which you're kind of finding a balance in all of these kind of axes of your personality and your being, and that's what being a good person is about, and that's what moral education is about, and all the developing all the right kind of habits and dispositions to kind of make you do the right thing at the right time when you need to. So anyways, that's the gist of Aristotle here. It's a lot, but that's it for today, and I'll be talking with y'all soon.